Okay, so recently, one thing that I've seen that's pretty big talk in the Octobrush chat is positioning and approaching, partly because of all the buffs that people have been describing with new kits and the like. But what I've kind of noticed is that not a lot of people really have a solid understanding of what approaching really means with Octobrush, because it's not really like any other weapon in the sense that you can't just run up to people the same way. And the reason for that is because Octobrush is a frontline, similar to 10 attack, but this is the 10 attacks range. Another weapon it's compared to a lot is the Splat Roller. Let me go find it. This is the Splat Roller's range. This is the Octobrush's range. So, quite a bit shorter than the other two. And this whole part here that I'm standing in is not really a damaging range. You get very inconsistent damage from here, while the other two, while not consistent either, are significantly more. So, if you try to attack from your max range the same way you would for as a 10 attack or as a Splat Roller, you're not really going to be doing any damage. See, like, it takes me much longer. Sometimes you don't even get hit at all, which can cause problems when it comes to approaching in a similar way. But the thing that sets Octobrush apart from 10 attack and Splat Roller and other frontlining weapons is the fact that when you're in a tip box, you can't really escape. Like, there's not really any getting out of this, as long as it's positioned properly, because it's so big. And it's a 3-shot for the most part, 4-shot in other ranges, but in its effective range is a 3-shot. So it's relatively quick, not as quick as most other frontlining time to kills if we're comparing them, but across all weapons it's fairly quick, and it's very hard to get out of, which kind of sets Octobrush apart as something that is a little more difficult to approach with someone, but once you're there, it kills much more efficiently than most other weapons. So, kind of like, well, how do I get close enough to do that, considering that it's short range, which is why a lot of people don't really play it. They just don't think it can approach very well. And it is something it struggles with, but there's quite a few things you can do about it. One thing I have noticed a lot of people is they're like, oh, that enemy right there. And then they just go and swing. Now, the issue with this is that people have eyes. If I'm a 10 attack and I see you coming at me, I'm just gonna gun you down. And considering that we don't have as much range as the 10 attack, we're gonna get gunned down before we can even really like do anything. Like you might be able to get 2 or 3 swings off, but you're gonna be far enough away that it's not gonna matter very much, and you're gonna be dead. You're gonna die like the little bitch you are. So instead, you wanna abuse hiding spots, height ranges like that. Kind of want to pop out of nowhere. You always want to be the first one to swing, or the first one to shoot in this case. You never want to be caught off guard, because this weapon really is like really good at catching people off guard. So basically stay stealthy during it, and if you do have to approach someone outright, you want to kind of scoot over to them, not to just hide your ink, but to prevent you being shot at. You want to start to take cover. See how when I did that, just kind of out of habit, I went to the wall and I kind of popped out now? You want to make sure that you have as much of your body covered as possible, like as little routes to shoot you. And you want to make sure that as you're going, you're protected. So things like if there's a Hydra right there, or if there's someone over here just kind of waiting, you're not going to get gunned down by them too. So you want to make it fast, and then you want to get out of there. Now, another thing I've noticed is a lot of people bring up the fact that it's a sharking weapon, and yeah, it is. It can shark around in one area and just kind of kill people that go into it. But the issue with that is that kind of takes you away from the fight. Because if you're waiting around in this one area and your team is pushing tower or rainmaker or whatever, they don't really have you with them. And if you're sharking around with them, you're a lot more detectable. And sharking isn't necessarily a bad idea, but the issue with it is that sometimes it can be detrimental because you can't really shark properly in an area that people are looking like that, like if they're pushing up. Partly because there's not enough of your ink, and partly because of just the way people will notice you in different ways than what they would if they're approaching an area that they're not really comfortable in. So if you're playing defensively, sharking is a good option, but if you're pushing up, it's not really the best move on your part. While we're on the topic of sharking, though, I'd like to mention a lot of people just kind of wait in one area. Like, if that's the enemy, you just kind of wait for them to come near you, and then you do that. The issue is that you're out in the open, like this, so you aren't protected, which kind of comes down to, like, hugging a wall or something of the like. Because if that's a blaster especially, and they're just firing, odds are they're probably just going to hit you, and they're not even going to notice. And dying like that really sucks, getting just mowed down. So what you want to do when you're sharking is hide in a spot. See, I'm not close enough so that if it is a blaster, this kind of comes down to map awareness, because if that's a 10 attack, I'm going to treat it differently than if it's a blaster. Or if it's a roller, I'm not going to go directly up to it the same way I am. So I'm going to hide, let's say, just for guide purposes, that that's a blaster. I'm going to hide over here. I'm going to shark, and I'm going to approach. And then I'm going to pop out when they're close enough to me, and then I'm going to reposition. I'm not going to stay in that same area because they're going to call you out and be like brush sharking on left or brush sharking wherever, and you're going to be detected, and then your position is useless. So sharking is okay in a defensive position. Just make sure you stay mobile and you're not in one spot. I'd say more than 10 to 15 seconds waiting in one spot means that you should probably reposition. So that's mostly covering how to approach front lines in particular. Back lines can be a little trickier because, like, say a Hydra's positioned up there, and you're like, well, how do I do that? Because that can be challenging. Honestly, there's not really a solid way to approach back lines. It can be very difficult. Sometimes the best thing you can really do is just avoid a backline. Make use of the cover you have, make use of the terrain. Brush really appreciates it when you are very creative with the terrain you're in. But a few things that help it, I guess, make it sort of bearable is you have auto bomb. So you can kind of throw them and piss off any backline. If anything's stingraying, I like to try and get an auto bomb in because they can't kill me immediately. In a similar way, because if you're rushing a charger and you just throw an auto bomb, you're just going to get shot. But stingray doesn't really kill you as fast as a charger bullet would. So you can just lob auto bombs, piss off a stingray. In particular, it works with stingrays. It also works better with heavies. You can just kind of throw that and get out of there. It's got a pretty big tracking radius, so you really don't have to be directly up to them. And it's just generally helpful for displacing people, or at least annoying them so that your teammates can get to them. You also have inkjet, which can be a little risky, again, because you run the risk of getting shot as you're over here. But if you're accurate enough, part of it comes really down to being very good with inkjet. You can really threaten a backline, at least get a trade most of the time. It really depends on the situation, obviously, but overall, probably your best use of fighting backlines is your kit, not necessarily the main weapon. It's also part of the reason that Octobrush is such hot ass. But yeah, that's basically how you approach a backline. As for lockout scenarios, places where you can't really approach, you don't have your own ink or any sort of paint, part of it comes down to comps, which is something I wanted to get in a later video, but I can cover the basics of it now. Octobrush needs paint. It needs at least 2 map control specials, I'd say, or 1 map control special and weapons that output a lot of turf. So things with Inkstorm, things with bubbles, likes Bomb Rush in particular, because Bomb Rush just straight up forces people out of an area. And that can be really beneficial because no one can really touch you when you're in it because they can't approach it. They'll die. It's different from an ink storm or something, where as you're swimming, people can kind of go in and shoot you, and even though they take tip damage, they're not necessarily threatened by it immediately like they are autobomb, or not autobomb, suction bomb rush or something along that lines. Octobrush also pairs up well with dualies, because dualies just the rolls and everything make them very independent. So Octobrush can just kind of shadow a dualies as they're going, and if the dualies go down, they can just kind of clean up. Brushes also deal with Brellas, which is one of the main counters to dualies right now. That may be subject to change in the future, but in the current meta now, dualies benefit from Brush quite a bit, more than any other class, I'd say, just because of the way Brush counters what really counters dualies. To a lesser extent, they also do counter shooters, because Brush does fuck up shooters. But it's mostly Brellas now that deal with dualies well. Dualies also just in general have kits that benefit the Octobrush, like custom dualie squelchers, outputs a lot of paint, has Inkstorm. Good stuff for Octobrush, although Bomb Rush is a little more ideal for an Octobrush in my opinion. It's not bad. And then there's On Parries, which are probably one of its best teammates. You have double Inkjet synergy. On Parries can be the main frontliner. Brush doesn't like to be the main source of aggression on the team. It likes to be a little bit more defensive, building Inkjets, guarding backline, and stuff like that. So, you know, when you're locked out and your comp has paint, but it's not really like readily available, they're still building their specials and everything, it's kind of hard to make yourself useful as an Octobrush. One thing I can say though is you make very good bait, which sounds pretty awful that basically your best option is being fodder, but it can be a little useful just as long as you play it right. So thing is, you have this huge ass hitbox. Now the thing is, it's big, it's loud, and people are gonna see it if you just start swinging. So you can pick a spot high up that makes you harder to shoot, and you can swing and chip a few people, and then you can reposition. And it's very nice for your teammates, not only because it provides chip, but it's a really nice distraction. And ideally, what you do is you stay just out of the opponent's hitbox. This is where it becomes tricky, and honestly, just take some intuition and some practice. You stay just out of their hitbox, hit them a little bit, and then you force them to chase you, which is part of the reason that swim speed is nice on Octobrush, because you can just chip them, have them come near you, and swim away, and you can lure them into an area. Just make sure you call it out to your teammates and say, like, you're being followed and that someone's near you. It can be very beneficial to just have someone chase you off, even if no one capitalizes on it and takes them out. Just having someone away from the fight while trading someone who's not very good in the fight to begin with is better than having basically a 4 versus 3.5, because that's basically what Octobrush is in this scenario. So that's a good option. There's also chucking auto bombs, but honestly, they don't do much. Like in this situation, it's very difficult to get any sort of weird auto bomb cheese kills, and they're not consistent. So I wouldn't recommend staying passive and just throwing auto bombs, because it's basically a 3v4 with bombs, which it's just not very useful to the team, honestly. Because what you can do with auto bombs is you can tech the thing and you don't get damaged at all, and even if you do, it's very minimal, so they're just not as threatening as other stuff. So you can't just sit back and spam bombs like this. You actively have to distract people and draw them away. There's also flanking. If you can find an area to go around, even just running around in mid and just pissing people off is much, much better than trying to force your way out from a front standpoint out of your spawn, because that's just not how Octobrush works. You never want to approach directly with this weapon. So just try and find different angles and ways to chip people and be annoying, and you can chuck auto bombs. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but that shouldn't be your main reliance when you're locked out like that. But yeah, that's basically like the TLDR of positioning with Octobrush. I can get a little bit more in depth, and I plan on posting videos of my gameplay so you can kind of break down how I approach and how I do things, and also watch me die to bombs a lot, because I do that. But basically my main take on how to approach Octobrushes. Let me know if there's any sort of guides you'd like in the future. Right now I'm thinking about making one on just general team comps and everything that work well with Octobrush. But yeah, that's basically it.